Thank you guys for joining us today. We have a really fun panel where we're going to be dialoguing around 4 questions, and we have really unique perspectives, interdisciplinary perspectives on this topic of engaging both communities and classrooms in the West around this topic of water. Today, we hope that we can highlight the ways in which we can engage communities around an awareness of water, and then also foster interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary connections around water. Before we dive into the panel questions, we do have some audience engagement that we'd like you guys to start off by considering. So as we begin, we invite you to reflect on your own relationship with water. For you, water may be something that sustains your body, a place of recreation or relaxation, central to your work, or perhaps just an occasional thought. So I'm going to give you guys about 10 to 15 seconds to consider this and then to keep that in mind as we continue today. All right, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought as we continue through today's conversation, and we'll revisit that today at the end of the panel. Our first question that we're excited to dialogue around is when we consider humans' relationship to the landscape, especially through a lens of water, what complexities or tensions do you see emerging? And if I may, I'd like to invite Caitlin to kick us off with that question.
Is this working? Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I have to admit I was a little intimidated by this morning's presentations. I don't consider myself an expert on water, and I learned a lot this morning. But I am a geographer, and I bring a perspective from human geography into the Water and Climate Project that I thought would be worth sharing with the audience today. And so I wanted to start by suggesting that water, I think it's become clear in the sessions today, is a lens through which we can see many different parts of our social and physical world. There are attempts to study water from lots of different angles. So we can take what we might call a purely scientific approach to understanding the hydrological cycle, understanding atmospheric conditions. This is a really important field of research and science that has brought us a lot of understanding about our world. But at the same time, studies of water from a more purely scientific, I say scientific even though I think that science is really much broader than that, but that's how it's used commonly, of course. That kind of limits our understandings, right? And so I'd like to recognize the contributions that we get from other sciences, especially the biophysical sciences, and to highlight some of the other ways that we see and know water. And I'm just curious, how many folks in this room come from what you would consider more of a biophysical background? Yeah, awesome. So it's really cool to see you all here. I don't mean to diminish your work at all. I think it's amazing. So in geography, well, some folks use the term socio-ecological system as a way of understanding our world, and that highlights the interconnections between and interdependence between human systems and ecological ones, and we can understand water in that context. In geography, I prefer to use the term hydrosocial, and so that also implies that water is inseparable from the societies, the human societies that depend upon it, that manage it, that shape it. But it also means that water is fundamentally relational, and Jason was speaking about that a little bit earlier as well. So water mediates the relationships between people in space, across different places, and it mediates the relationship between humans and our biophysical worlds, between humans and nature. And so when we start to see water as relational, it opens up a different way of understanding what water does in our societies, how it functions. And so it helps us ask a different set of questions. What exactly is the work that water is doing when we talk about it? What do we mean when we talk about water in the context of aridity in the West? What do we mean when we talk about water? Water is life. What kind of work is being done by some of those discourses. I think those are important questions to ask. So it also causes us to ask how water is produced. And that sounds like a funny question because water comes from the sky, that flows into rivers and goes into the ocean, and it goes, so we know that cycle. And some people know it in much more detail than I do. But water is produced in lots of other ways. And so the very large system of dams and reservoirs that have become such a dominant way of understanding the system today, they didn't always exist. And sometimes I forget that there was a world before the Hoover Dam was built, before Lake Mead and Lake Powell existed. And that this is actually a relatively, not even relatively, a very new system for human societies. And so I like to understand how that came about. How did the massive infrastructural project of building these dams, how is it situated within not just American history, but global history? And it happens that at that time in the early 19th century, 20th century, massive infrastructure, water containment projects were going on across the world. It wasn't just happening in the American West. And so it's an interesting set of questions to ask what was going on in other parts of the world and to think about the exploration of the West, the invention of the state of Wyoming, of the idea of the rural American West as a part of global processes. So that's sort of my view on interdisciplinarity. And I wanted to read a couple quotes that I think kind of illustrate the approach that Western society has taken to understanding water and natural resources. They're very short. One is, strive on, the control of nature is won, not given. And the other is, the foundation of agriculture is not rooted in soil, but rather in the vision and attainment of men. Do you guys know where these quotes come from? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think I'll end there. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin. I really appreciate that you called it hydrosocial. I think that's important to consider. In my expertise, I think more about the water quality. I sometimes forget the social aspect, and that's something that I've learned over the last 7-8 years as I've been working on water issues here in Wyoming, the understanding that beyond, Jason brought up the Bureau of Reclamation, as we think about them and other state and federal agencies, it's critical to consider this human aspect beyond just the ecosystem component. While we're on this question, I would love to invite Wyatt to share his perspective.
Yeah, so I don't know if I can articulate that as well as she did. But yeah, I'm an undergrad here. I'm studying psychology. So with that, in psychology, I don't often think of like issues here in Laramie with water quality. But taking this class with Dr. Pilkerton, it has been very informative, thinking about our relationship with water, whether it's the Laramie River, Casper Aquifer, or like Plains Lakes, anything we can think about. We can often think of like issues going on with these, whether it's drought with the rivers, contamination of whether it's the aquifer or any source of drinking water. I believe we can imagine any kind of issue going on with that. Yeah, that's kind of my main thoughts on that. I don't know. Like I said, I can't articulate it as well as you did, but.
Yeah, I second that. Caitlin's response was beautiful. We're going to move on to our next question. So as we've discussed previously in today's seminary speaker, as well as the last panel, we know that water is inherently both inter and transdisciplinary. And this can bring many opportunities and challenges when we think about how to navigate these complex issues. So if you guys could please speak to how your disciplinary training sees or deals with water, and how does this perspective, or what does this perspective mean for the way that you think about engaging with communities or as students with water? And perhaps I can invite Catherine to start us off with this.
Hi, everyone. As an anthropologist, we very much look at humans and how they interact with themselves, with other people, and the land around them. most people forget anthropology is a thing because we're very much not hard science, but we're important to understanding how water works. When you think of how settlements develop, we always have to be near water, and if not, we have to figure out a way to get water there. And so we'd have to make sure that we not only focus on the hard sciences and look at like water quality and making sure that the biology is there, but we're also very important to the anthropological side and making sure that the people have what they need.
Lillian.
Yeah, I would love to add my perspective. As a geology major, I think the ways that we talk about water in geology are often based on very deep time. And some of the coolest things about geology, in my opinion, are how we can use like the history of where water was and what it was doing to tell about the earth at that stage. So things like banded iron formations telling us about how oxygenated the oceans were at that time, or sedimentary structures where we can tell how much water was in a river and which direction it was flowing and how fast it was flowing, and we have equations for all of these things. And so we talk about water a lot in geology, but I think it can be in such a deep time perspective that sometimes we don't really talk a lot about the current implications of water and the issues that we have as a society or how it shapes the land now. And I think the other way that we might look at water is honestly as a lab tool. I work as an undergrad assistant in a aqueous geochemistry lab, which is super cool. And we do a lot of interesting experiments with, pressurized water and rock and what minerals precipitate and what ions come out in the water. And with all our lab procedures, it's always like, oh, triple rinse with DI water to clean your tubes. And so we think about it as very much a chemical, which is, I think, another way that we can become a little bit disconnected from the big picture. And it makes me interested to wonder what our lab work would look like if we kind of always kept the bigger picture in mind of, well, why are we doing these experiments with water? And, when I'm triple rinsing my tubes with DI water, it's not just some random chemical. It's so connected to the big picture, especially I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. So there's not that much water there, just outside. And I consider myself very privileged to not have directly felt the effects of living in like a very water scarce environment. I never saw directly any shortages growing up, which I think was a very privileged way to live. But the honors water class has really helped me to think differently about water and the way it influences people, and it makes me look at my scientific work differently.
Thank you, both Catherine and Lily and Wyatt, for sharing your perspective as students. I think it's a really nice balance that we have today about people who are engaging communities in classrooms, but also hearing from those who are engaging. Caitlin, I know you were excited to share some thoughts on this question. Could I invite you to share next?
Yeah, we were asked which two questions we wanted to speak on, so I feel like I'm speaking too much, but hopefully others will speak soon. I think just on the question of how, in my work with the WYACT project, I've been thinking about engaging communities in Wyoming. I said earlier that I think that this view of understanding water as relational is really important. And in other circles, if you're thinking about, for example, property, there's a very interesting idea that property is not a thing that exists on a table, but it's actually a relationship between people. So if this cup is mine, then that means our relationship is you can't drink out of it. So property is also a relation, and in the same way, I think that the concept of property and so the concept of water is also really relational, both as a thing and as an idea. And what that means for engaging with people is that people need to have trust with one another. And so as in some of my work, I've been engaged in planning around different kinds of water futures and getting people, especially from a wide array of backgrounds, into a room to think about how we would respond to some of the more dire futures that might exist around water and the way that water is changing due to climate change. And when you ask people to come together from very different walks of life and perspectives to think about these really difficult questions, establishing trust and relationships with one another is very important. And so in my work, I have other colleagues in the room as well. We make a really concerted effort to get people to know one another before we start talking about some of those difficult issues. And yeah, so I would say trust and confidence building across different groups is really the most important thing for me that I've learned.
Yeah, Caitlin, thank you for sharing that. I think this idea of relationships and trust is something that we've seen highlighted over and over again today, both at the community, the state, and the federal level. And then perhaps also trust that's being omitted, or relationships that are being omitted from a lot of these voices, as we heard earlier today. When I think about a lot of these transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary issues and perspectives and learning from these experiences, I think this is a really nice segue to our next question, where we wanted to explore both insights and lessons we've gained from engaging with both communities and students in Wyoming and beyond around water or water conservation. And for me, this has been a transformative experience. When I first started my PhD research thinking about water quality in the West, I did not have sight about the human aspect. And I quickly learned through a working group that I was collaborating with that we can't only focus on water quality, as much as I love it, but really thinking about the water user. So who is the end user of this water, and what does it mean if we're changing management or monitoring systems? What does this mean if we're changing the way that they can access this water, the time of year that they can access this water? This has also been really powerful and demonstrated through my experience with my students. So water, of course, I teach in the Honors College, is an interdisciplinary course that looks at water from all angles, of course, environmental, but also societal and political. And I've watched the students' perspective on water morph in really interesting ways over the first couple of weeks of class as we dove into some of these water topics that we've talked about today, but also other national and international water issues that are being contended with. There was this feeling of need to do something, but almost a little bit of despair because there's so many issues to consider. And we're reading the book, I forgot the name of the book. The Big Thirst, thank you. The Big Thirst by Fishman, Charles Fishman. So The Big Thirst by Charles Fishman. And he talks about how all water issues are local. So if we think about water here, we can't necessarily send it to Nebraska for the farmers. The water is here, and this is where we have it. And as these students have learned more about water in the West and water that we're currently contending with different issues for, I've seen a lot of motivation and inspiration in the students to think about how their actions can be used to better the water or to conserve the water locally. And so that's been a really meaningful and positive feedback loop that I've seen within the class about the more we know, it can actually empower us to make decisions that can be protective of our water. Both Beth and Caitlin, you guys had really meaningful things that you'd like to share. I know, Caitlin, your research and expertise is around this idea of engaging communities in water, as well as your collaborators that you're doing this work with. Perhaps we could start with Beth, and you could talk a little bit about this colloquium that you ran in the spring, Listening with Water.
Sure. So I want to just begin by explaining that, because many of you may not know. Oh, thank you. That the Neltje Center is a relatively new UW-owned and operated Center for Arts, Culture, and the Humanities, which is located just south of Sheridan, Wyoming, and I am the director of the Neltje Center. And a lot of the work we do is bringing UW faculty and students up to the Neltje Center for mini residencies, interdisciplinary workshops, retreats, all kinds of things. Across fields of art, dance, music, history, philosophy, and really more across the university even than that. But this past spring, we held an interdisciplinary workshop, actually a 3-day workshop, where we brought in the cultural historian and environmental artist Gretchen Henderson, who is now she was with University of Texas at Austin when we worked with her. Now she is a distinguished professor of humanities at Rhodes College. And we brought together a group of about 15 students, scholars, scientists, artists, writers from the community, from the UW community and the Sheridan community, to participate in this 3-day workshop called Listening with Water. It's part of a body of work that Gretchen does across the country called Dear Body of Water. And that is a project. It's really an initiative that engages arts-based methods to grow conversations toward collaborative care of watersheds and the essential role water plays in our lives. So the Listening with Water project at the Neltje Center really was intended to bring Wyomingites together to reflect on our relationship with water as it flows through Wyoming's collective histories and shapes present practices and offers a wellspring of future possibilities. So this is the interior of the Neltje Center, a large gallery there where Gretchen created this system of some of the waterways in Wyoming in a kind of graphic way. This is not really a presentation so much as I'm going to run through a bunch of images from this workshop. This is part of the Neltje Center. It's filled with art. It's the former home of Neltje, who was an artist and philanthropist and art collector. And it's where we hold a lot of these workshops and retreats at the Neltje Center. This is just a group of artists working at the Neltje Center. This is a typical day at the Neltje Center, to be quite honest. But what I wanted to talk about is this workshop wherein we brought together folks from the community with what we called knowledge leaders. So we had a hydrologist speak with us. Jason Robeson came and spoke with us from his perspective on water rights and water law. We spoke with a rancher. We spoke with a civil engineer in Sheridan, all around different perspectives on water in our lives. So this is part of the outdoors at the Neltje Center. There are ponds. There's Lower Piney Creek. We took a long look at a lot of aspects of Lower Piney Creek on the property of the Neltje Center. This is the group moving through Sheridan along Big Goose Creek and Little Goose Creek. We spoke with the civil engineer Hans Mercer about the restoration of the creeks in Sheridan. The restoration is focused on flood mitigation and also bringing more community access to the creeks in Sheridan. We spoke with the folks at Piney Island Native Plants about the importance of water to agriculture and native plants in particular. This is James Trosper, the Sundance chief of Eastern Shoshone, and he was here at the creek with our group, talking with us about knowledges from the indigenous communities around water. And here we are again with James Trosper, and there's Jason on the side too, at Lower Piney Creek. We also created, Gretchen assisted us in creating postcards of areas around the Neltje Center that focused on water. And part of her project, Dear Body of Water, has to do with people writing postcards that are essentially love letters to bodies of water that are important to them. So I just include a couple of these here, love letters to Piney Creek that were done during this process. So that's really it. I just wanted to run through some things quickly. I think the workshop was really important because the primary goal of this workshop was really for the participants to think very carefully about water in their lives and the collective nature of water to our community, the world, our individual lives, and to bring more focused attention on just the topic of water in general, and to just highlight the way in which, I mean, it's metaphor, it sort of flows through our world, our lives, ourselves, our bodies. So it was a really, really interesting and meaningful undertaking, I think, for everyone involved.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Beth. So that was Listening with Water up at the Neltje Center, and Grace Henderson, correct me? Gretchen Henderson was the artist that they collaborated with that.
Yes, she was the interdisciplinary fellow that we brought in to conduct the workshop.
Wonderful. I think something that comes out of listening to you talk about this experience was how meaningful it was for the participants to engage with community members that are experts on water, but also to have that two-way dialogue, which I think segues really nicely to the work that Caitlin is doing with some collaborators in this room about communities and thinking about water and changes to water that we're going to have in the future. So Caitlin, if you'd like to take a few moments to talk about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. You are so insightful. Well, there are so many WIACT folks in this room and speaking on these panels, and I think it really speaks to the interdisciplinary nature of this really big project. And so I know some of you don't know much about it, but it's a 5-year, it's a 5-year project focused on bringing climate data and science to specific watersheds in Wyoming. And the project is focused on the headwaters of the Snake River, the Green River, and the Wind River. And so in some of, so it's very interdisciplinary, and some of the, I guess my thoughts are kind of going like this, but there are some challenges to that interdisciplinarity because we don't all have a shared language. And so we've been learning to speak with one another. And I think some of that has made me go back to kind of the roots and the origins of my discipline and trying to understand why I say things as I do. So it's really strengthened my own understanding of my approach to seeing and knowing the world. But I think I've also picked up on the way that some of my colleagues also speak, especially from the climate sciences. I'm learning a lot about hydrology, which is really exciting. I'm sort of seeing the world in different ways. And I think one thing in terms of the question of what does it mean to engage communities, which is really the focus of this panel and the focus of the scenario planning work that we are doing. In the scenario planning work, it's really important for people to have trust that they're thinking about futures that in a way that is based in science, based in the facts, based in maybe more recent information and projections. And so we've done a lot to bring climate scientists into the room in our planning sessions and to bridge that gap between researchers and the folks that we're doing these planning processes with. So that's been a really important kind of bridge. And you don't always find scientists in the room in a planning process. And so I think that allows for questions to be asked and for new kind of views to come up. But one thing I'm really interested in exploring is bringing more of the arts into those processes as well. So how do we represent the importance of water, of the river systems? How might you think about the future through a more creative process. So some of those things are coming into our work as well. Maybe I'll stop. Yeah.
I'd love to give opportunity. Do you guys?
Kind of going back into what you guys are talking about with art. There's a lot of different ways of looking at this. Like I said, psychology major, never really thought about a lot of the issues here in Laramie with water. But it's interesting to see like this class with Dr. Pinkerton. We've got people of all kinds of different backgrounds, anthropology, geology, business, psychology. Everyone brings their own kind of viewpoints to the issues here in Laramie, whether it's economics, worrying about like pollution, drought. So it's been really interesting kind of seeing these different perspectives. And then going back to art, we actually took a trip to the art museum here on the university, and there's an excellent exhibit there that portrays the Colorado River and kind of the humans' involvement with it. I don't remember who did that. Okay. We'll have to get back to that. Yep. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. If you guys ever get a chance, check it out.
Yeah, I also have really enjoyed hearing all of the different perspectives in this class. Like I said, since I grew up in a desert, water wasn't something that I thought about that much because I didn't interact with it in a natural landscape very much. So it's been really eye-opening. And I think like Dr. Pilkington said, we've had this collective sense of like wanting to do something and kind of having a little bit of despair because it feels like there's not very much to be done. I think one of the cool things about being together in that setting and being part of a larger university is that we do have the opportunity to do something. And so like one of the assignments in our class is this group project where the end goal is some sort of outreach or engagement with the community about a water related issue that affects our community. And I think that what that does is it gives a pathway for all of the motivation that we have and the want to do something and make something better. And it gives us a way to channel it into actual action. And I think that's the part of the process that creates hope, is that since we don't have to just sit with that feeling of I want to do something, but I don't know how, and it's very isolated, but now we're in like this kind of community and group where there's a way to move forward and do something. And I think that's one of the benefits of having group conversations like in this water class and like in this discussion with all of you here, is that instead of just sitting in our own individual feelings of despair, we can as a group find a way to move forward and have creative solutions and have dialogue in a way that promotes action. And
Thank you, Lily. I don't think I could have said that better myself, this idea of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and really bringing in these different perspectives to create a meaningful dialogue, particularly when we think about art. Thank you, Patrick Keyket. There's also a wonderful exhibit by Tristan Duke around polar photography, so I do encourage you guys to go visit the UW Art Museum and check those out. As we wrap up our panel today, we had one really meaningful question that we would like to dialogue, and then when we do get to our question and answer session, we invite you guys to think about this question as well. And this is the question of how can we, or members of the university, collaborate effectively with outside interest groups and organizations to promote meaningful conversations about water, and what can this potentially look like? And Beth, if I could perhaps have you start us off with that question.
I will say, first of all, that it is a large part of the mission of the Neltje Center in general to reach out and engage outside the university, though we do a lot of work with the university for sure. That's sort of our primary work. But we engage a lot with groups in the, let's call it the northern part of the state. And I think this Listening with Water workshop was a good example of that, because we were able to reach out to organizations and companies and individuals. We spoke with a local hydrologist in the area, in addition to the other folks that I mentioned. And I think that at the Neltje Center, one of the things that we try to do is sort of bring the university out into the community, and the work that we do, at least at the Neltje Center, around this is just one of a group of interdisciplinary studies and workshops that we have done over the years at the Neltje Center, but always with the idea of bringing the university to people in the northern part of the state, I would say. And I think that is really important. It kind of, how would you call it? I don't know if it's a word, deinstitutionalizes the university, but I think it helps people understand that we all can engage with the university in different kinds of ways that are both academic and outside of academia per se. And that's one of our efforts, I think, at the Neltje Center that we've been working on for the last couple of years. And this is an example of that.
Thank you, Beth. I feel like something I heard you say is this idea of deinstitutionalizing the university and kind of breaking down these barriers, which I think many people in this room can agree is the issue within our state, the relationship that members of our state do have with the university. Caitlin, your group is doing a lot of work on this, and you guys are putting a substantial amount of effort into building holistic and really authentic relationships with these communities that you're exploring water-related issues with. Would you be willing to say a few words on that?
Sure, thank you. Well, I mean, I think that the university relationships with communities who are dealing with the problems that we are studying is so essential. So one of, I think, the tenets of the WIACT project is really to produce usable science. So science that is not just for journals that have, various walls behind them, but insights and information that can really be acted upon. And that's hard. That's really challenging. And it requires a really deep knowledge and understanding of some of the problems and complexities around, in our case, water, weather, and climate. And for me, I mean, the space of working in Wyoming is new, and I'm forming relationships with people in the different basins that we're working in, but they're new. And those are also based on the institutional affiliation that I bring into those spaces. So what does it mean when someone sees me drive up in a UW marked vehicle, and what are they going to think? And those are some of the things that I'm learning. Sometimes we might want to shout that out a little more than we might at other times. But there are folks in this room who have spent decades working with the communities who will be affected by climate change in the 3 basins we're working in. And I think the most important thing is really that we're following their lead, but also establishing our own sets of relationships. I mean, we're all individuals and we connect with people in different ways. We bring different kinds of things into relationships. So I'm really grateful to the folks who are opening those doors for me. And I think it's incumbent upon me to honor the person, the people who are opening those doors and the relationships that they have with the stakeholders and communities in the basins that we're working with. And, Wyoming is a big state and it can be expensive to travel across it. And so that's definitely a major barrier to getting into communities and really spending time showing up to water board meetings, showing up to all sorts of planning meetings, kind of just being around. I think that's really important, and I wish I could do more of it. I actually do think that, that's really an anthropological perspective, right? The sort of importance of ethnography, of time, of relationships. And, the folks in this room who do a lot of that biophysical science, but who have spent the time around the table sharing food, sharing jokes, have these longstanding relationships, they're doing that anthropological work as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those are some of my thoughts around that.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin, for sharing that. That was really lovely. I think something else that we oftentimes consider is the way that we can do this in the classroom. So this is something I think about regularly. How can I help my students connect these broader issues, and how can they also engage with community? Lily, you alluded to an integrative experiential learning project that we're currently doing in our course, where groups of students have selected local or regional water-related issues, and they're going to be tackling those over the next 10 weeks or so and building really holistic projects that will be shared back with our communities. Lily, you did express some interest in talking a little bit about your project. Would you like to take the opportunity to do that?
Sure. So we just started these projects, so it might change and develop a little bit over time. But the project that I'm working on is related to lake eutrophication, which I've learned a lot about in my geology and environmental science classes, but that I had no idea about before. It's basically when usually agricultural runoff like fertilizer provides an excess of nutrients in bodies of water, and that causes algae overgrowth, which eventually causes an anoxic condition in the lake, which is really harmful to the ecosystem. And my project and that I'll be working with my classmates on is going to be related to trying to assess like what college students know about this issue and trying to spread a little bit of awareness, and then from there trying to provide a dialogue. We're planning on reaching out to policymakers or people who are involved in managing lakes and trying to learn about what they're currently doing and provide like a dialogue between policymakers and students to try and bridge the gap between feeling like you can't do anything and feeling like you don't know anything, and then actually talking to the people who are involved, both so that we can learn and also that they can learn that we care. So I'm pretty excited about my project. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, thank you, Lily, for sharing that. I want to take a minute before we revisit that audience engagement prompt to think about how beautifully our session segued after Jason talking about this idea of hydroimagination, and then thinking about hydrosocial and really digging into this idea of classrooms and communities and how we engage with water and the multiple voices that are meaningful to bring into the room when we're thinking about it. I'd now like for you guys to take a few moments to revisit your relationship with water and think about whether anything has changed as a result of today's panel discussion and these different perspectives that you just heard, whether that's personally, professionally, or in your community. After you guys have taken about 15 to 20 seconds to think about this, I invite you to share it with your neighbor, and then we'll come back together for question and answer briefly. All right, folks. We're going to go ahead and come back to full circle. I'd love to invite you guys to engage with our panelists and perhaps ask questions that you may be interested in dialoguing with us more about. So at this point, if anybody has a question, I have a microphone and I'd be happy to bring it to you right here.
I disagree with you strongly when you talk about the end user of water. There is no end use of water.
Correct. It goes around and around in a cycle. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, John.
Do you guys think that, like, when we talk about like tragedies, potential tragedies with water, like floods, it's obviously bad for us locally, but maybe down the line it's positive. How do you think that plays in with our relationship with water? And as in, should we always appreciate water, even when it's not necessarily a positive for us?
Thought you raised your hand.
I didn't actually.
Okay, it's ready. Caitlin, please.
I can really briefly address that. I mean, flooding is absolutely the flip side of drought, right? And it's something that our communities and our water managers have planned for, but in planning for it, they've also reduced the likelihood of smaller floods and increased the likelihood of bigger floods. And so there is a trade-off in managing systems, natural systems. And so I would just kind of leave you with that.
Yes, we'll start right here and then Marav.
Well, this is an amazing colloquium, so thank you for letting me have a second here. Just want to say how inspired I am by all of the perspectives and ideas, and I was just visiting with my neighbor here about just our thoughts and our reflection. It's taking the ideas and perspectives and moving that along to engagement and action is kind of a struggle. I'm a water resources professional with boots on the ground, and I just want to highlight something that two people said on the panel here. Attend your town council meetings, your city council meetings, your board of public utilities meetings, I was the permit writer for the Laramie Tie plant. So attend those meetings. That's a great way to be involved, get yourself educated, and be ready for engagement and action. So amazing and inspiring. So thank you.
If I may ask, how do people find out about these meetings?
Yeah, usually websites. So cities and towns post all of their public meetings. I worked for the Wyoming DEQ, so that's all through. You can sign up for the listserv and the Gov deliveries and get, I now work for Wyoming Water Development, so you can get on the Gov delivery, go on all the websites, put your email in, you'll get 1 million emails and invited to all the meetings. So yeah, please engage.
Wonderful, thank you. Marav.
Okay, another provocative question to the crowd. as a whole. First of all, how many of you have been on the Greenbelt in the last 2 weeks? Have you ever seen the river so low? No. You know that the Laramie River once went dry during the very, very bad drought we had in the 50s? Do you know that we're in a worse drought now than we were in the 50s? What are we going to do socially, hydro imagination, if we walk to the Greenbelt tomorrow and the Laramie River is dry?
Thank you, Merav. I think that's a really important topic. That is a concern that our class has discussed in some capacity as well. We know that some of the water leases that are used upstream of the town of Laramie use water in different ways, and perhaps there's ways that we can navigate changes to water right usage to allow for in-stream flow rights. That's something that's really important, particularly for game and fish. They think about this a lot with managing fisheries, but we also know this has other important implications for downstream water users. Would anybody else like to say something on Merav's provocative question? Thank you, Merav.
Oh, I will.
Yes, please.
That like unmatchful creek is dry down. So I see.
I personally have seen what that looks like when rivers go dry, creeks go dry, because of very mismanaged agricultural use of water. So it's a real thing, but then how do you bring it back? And so in the question of the river, you'd have to do a ton of probably soil health things to start to get greater infiltration of water. In the case of the creeks, you'd have to shut the pivots off and start to encourage greater infiltration of water with the rain, and then eliminate additional uses of that groundwater. So you just have to basically go back to bringing the water back, and you start in the in the mountains where the snow comes down, and you would encourage snow by encouraging healthy forests, and also you would encourage healthy grasslands, because all of these things cycle water. And so you would start to do that, and you would just create a whole governance around managing for water in the river. And it would be a radical shift from what we're currently doing, which I consider to be very extractive and very degrading to the soils. And so you would go back to saying, how do we restore soil health and rain cycling biologically, not through, say, like tons of cloud seeding, because that would only be a very temporary thing. You just really start to look at the whole of the restoration process.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. I love this idea of bringing awareness to these other uses of water. As we learned earlier today, a lot of our current management for water systems is driven towards some specific industries. And so thinking about how we can expand the awareness of water and these other potential uses of water and navigating that, and also advocating for that within our legislation, is really important to consider. I have been told it is time to wrap up. I hope that you guys learned something today about engaging with communities and have some thoughts that are going to provoke thoughts down the roads about how we all use and engage with water as individuals, both on the local, regional, as well as the nationwide level. With that, I'm going to hand it back over for perhaps some directions on lunch.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you guys so much. Can we just give one more round of applause for our panelists?